The term Golden Age comes from Greek mythology, particularly the works and days of Hesiod, and is part of the description of temporal decline of the state of peoples through 5 ages, gold being the first, and the one during which the golden race of humanity lived. By extension, Golden Age denotes a period of primordial peace, harmony, stability, and prosperity. The term Golden Age is at present used in the context of a specific time in the history of a particular country or the specific field, often being used to describe when something was at its best. Examples being the Golden Age of piracy, comics, and radio. Usually the term Golden Age is bestowed retroactively, when the period in question has ended and is compared with what followed in the specific field discussed. In 1974, a newly created game publishing company based out of Wisconsin, USA, self-published their first ever product, a small wood grain box set with 3 booklets inside. The production budget was $2,000 at the time, with only $100 of that budget going towards the artwork presented in the products. The box set cost $10 to purchase. It was amateurish in production and assumed the players picking up the product were familiar with similar games of its style. The company was Tactical Studies Rules, and the product was Dungeons & Dragons. As Dungeons & Dragons grew in popularity, so did TSR, releasing many new products both for D&D, but also many new board games and dice games. TSR also published both magazines and books. However, as TSR and popularity in D&D grew, so would backlash from many different sources. The game had been split into 2 different playable systems, the basic set being the easier one to play, aimed for the general public, while the advanced set was aimed more at experienced hobbyists and players. Both used different rules and game systems, many being direct contradictions to the other. Even as new sets and editions for the game continued to be created and sold, the original box set from 1974 would remain in publication until 1979, as it was a mass source of income for TSR. It would also be around this time that the Satanic Panic was growing its hatred towards D&D for its alleged promotion of Satanism, witchcraft, suicide, and murder.
D&D, it's become popular with children anywhere from grammar school on up. Not so with a lot of adults who think it's been connected to a number of suicides and murders.
Tonight we begin with a story about make-believe adventure and real-life violence.
Dungeons & Dragons is a real serious problem.
By 1996, TSR was under considerable stress due to some issues outside their control, but many well within. TSR had unbalanced their advanced D&D system through many supplements that ultimately hurt the long-time viability of the game. The multitude of playable settings being released had also cannibalized their only sales and discouraged players from purchasing settings books that might be gone in a few years. TSR had also been spending lots of money and time on new products that ultimately were of very little interest to consumers. David M. Ewalt stated in his book of Dice and Men, Spellfire and Dragon Dice were both very expensive to produce, and neither sold very well. After struggling for roughly a year and with no financial plan for TSR's survival, the company sold to Wizards of the Coast in 1997 for $25 million. Wizards of the Coast continued to use the TSR name and brand for D&D products for 3 years after purchasing the company, while they worked on their own new edition of Dungeons & Dragons. This edition would come out in 2000 and would show only the Wizards of the Coast brand. TSR was officially gone from D&D. In 2000, Wizards of the Coast released their first publication of D&D, named Dungeons & Dragons 3rd Edition. This edition was very well received, as it had unified the previous basic and advanced systems into one single product. It was far less restrictive, gave players more flexibility for character creation, and improved on combat within the game. 3 years later, they would release D&D 3.5. This version incorporated hundreds of rules changes and expanded the core rulebooks. In 2008, 4th edition would hit the shelves. This edition simplified many aspects of the game while also making the game faster to play and easier to understand. It restructured many character abilities and introduced player character and monster building tools. However, as well liked and enjoyable as these editions of D&D were, WotC still felt that based on player feedback from multiple surveys, they could make a better version of D&D for the market. And in 2012, they announced they were working on D&D's 5th edition of the game. With over 75,000 people playtesting and providing feedback to Wizards of the Coast, the development of 5th edition would take roughly 2 years before release. While 5th edition was in its development, Mark Merle, the lead developer of Dungeons & Dragons, said, I can't emphasize this enough. We're very serious about taking the time we need to get this right. In 2014, during Dungeons & Dragons' 40th anniversary, Wizards of the Coast released Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the largest and most popular edition to date. Once again simplifying many aspects of the game from previous editions and making it easier for new players to get into. 5th edition went on to make record sales and popularity in a very short amount of time. During 2017, WotC had stated that D&D had the most players in its history, with the number being between 12 million and 15 million in North America alone. Sales were also reported to be up 41% from the previous year, with them going up again by 52% in 2018. In 2020, Wizards announced that Dungeons & Dragons had its 6th annual year of growth in 2019, going up from the previous year's growth of 52% to a staggering 300%. No doubt as a direct response to the mass number of references to the game being done by pop culture, social media, and celebrities promoting playing the game themselves. Currently, 5th edition is the most recent and most popular version of Dungeons & Dragons, with a backwards compatible version slated to release during 2024, during D&D's 50th anniversary of the game. It is currently more popular than ever before, has more players than ever before, and is easier to get into now than ever before. The growing popularity of D&D has also given rise to many other tabletop role-playing games, both very similar and also very different from D&D. Games like Pathfinder have many similarities to Dungeons & Dragons, whereas games like the current edition of Call of Cthulhu differ wildly. With Dungeons & Dragons currently still hitting new records year after year, and with more players now than ever before, it's not difficult to see why most people would say that Dungeons & Dragons is bigger and better now than ever before. Yet there are some who say differently, that 3.5 was better, or that it was better when TSR was making it, or any number of different things. Some even say that tabletop role-playing games were at their best when they played it at home at their kitchen table with their parents and siblings, using whatever toys they had on hand for their characters and monsters. And while I'm happy they got to experience games like D&D in that way, it is sad to now see these same people arguing online and being angry about the current edition of Dungeons & Dragons and its mass popularity, going so far as to tell other players that they missed out on the actual golden age of RPGs. Usually the term Golden Age is bestowed retroactively, when the period in question has ended and is compared with what followed in the specific field discussed. The Greeks used it to describe the first state of decline, the state at which peace and harmony prevailed, and everything was good and right in the world. I don't know when Dungeons & Dragons will stop being popular. I don't know what the next edition of D&D will be like, nor can I predict the future growth, popularity, relevancy, or enjoyability of D&D. But I can look at people playing today. I can look at the growing number of references to the game, the public sales records, films, books, songs, and other media surrounding it. There is no questioning that Dungeons & Dragons is more popular and relevant now than ever before. We are in the period of prosperity. We are in the golden age of Dungeons & Dragons.